President Trump continues his tour across Asia. We are on day 29 of the government shutdown, with cracks beginning to show. All of that and so much more today on a special, very newsy Wednesday episode of 10 Minute Drill.
Everybody get up, get up.
The story of America is the story of an adventure.
I can hear you. The rest of the world hears you.
We are a nation under God, and I believe God intended for us to be free.
Yesterday, President Trump was in Japan, where he met with new Japanese Prime Minister Takaichi, who is the first female prime minister in Japan. The two leaders signed agreements on trade, nuclear technology, and rare earths. Takaichi also expressed her vision to strengthen the alliance between Japan and the United States. Gift giving is a huge part of Japanese culture, something that I really loved when I lived there. And Prime Minister Takaichi had a really great moment with President Trump where she presented him with a putter used by late Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, who President Trump had a very close relationship with. They golfed together, and it was really, really a neat moment. And I think that Takaichi's team did a really fantastic job preparing for this to get the most out of this meeting. President Trump continues his tour in South Korea, and tomorrow he will hold the long-awaited meeting with Chinese President Xi Jinping. As we hit day 29 of this federal government shutdown, one thing we've talked about quite a bit on 10 Minute Drill is the fact that Democrats entered this without any kind of strategy, and now cracks are beginning to show as we approach the deadline, the end of all funding for food stamps. Here's Tim Walz talking about that issue.
I want to be very clear. USDA, during this shutdown, has contingency funds that they could release just like us. They are choosing not to.
This is an issue that Democrats have started to circle around. The idea that President Trump has authority to direct emergency funds to cover food stamps, but a couple issues with that. First, Democrats can't decide whether President Trump is a totalitarian working around Congress or whether they want him to act like a totalitarian working around Congress to move emergency funding that he doesn't have the authority to move. President Trump, the White House, the administration, USDA have all said he does not have the authority to take emergency funds and give it to food stamps without congressional authority. So again, Democrats can't make up their mind on that issue. The other piece of this, those emergency funds are meant for things like natural disasters or actual emergencies, not Democrat temper tantrums because they can't get their way and they'd like to undo the 2024 election. Yesterday, Fox News reported that a coalition of industry groups representing small business owners demand that senators pass a clean continuing resolution to end the government impasse. This small business group follows the largest government employee union that called on Democrats yesterday to end their shutdown. But for good measure, here's a retired federal worker who is a Democrat calling on Democrats.
The Democrats, and I'm a Democrat, are the ones that actually, in the Senate side, shut down the government. So they have to get together and stop holding American hostage.
Now, yesterday, Democrats blocked the clean vote to open the government for the 13th time. And I would note again that Democrats voted for this same continuing resolution 13 times before this. And the reason for this entire shutdown is after Chuck Schumer voted for it just a few months ago, he got so much blowback that now Democrats have said they're going to shut down the government. But the question for every Democrat, whether you're John Ossoff or whether you're Mark Kelly in Arizona or any Democrat who considers themselves to be slightly reasonable, how far are you willing to go just to protect Chuck Schumer, particularly as you see 42 million people about to lose their food stamps? Yesterday morning, Fox News reported that Defending Education led a group of 26 parental rights groups in calling for a 50-state audit of their public education programs to find DEI and radical political influence. We talked before about Defending Education's reporting that found that the Biden administration had sent over $1 billion to states to cement these types of DEI programs that inject politics into K-12 classrooms. So clearly there's a lot of work to do in rooting that out and getting schools focused again on educating children. But this is an important development that we'll track here on 10 Minute Drill. Yesterday, we talked quite a bit about the New York mayoral race and socialist candidate Zohran. One thing that he said in the last week turned a lot of heads about 9/11.
I want to speak to the memory of my aunt. Who stopped taking the subway after September 11th because she did not feel safe in her hijab.
Now, a lot of people push back on this because what Zohran is trying to say here is the actual victim of September 11th wasn't the nearly 3,000 people who lost their lives or their friends and families who suffered because of it, but his aunt who felt uncomfortable riding the subway. Well, internet sleuths found out very quickly that there was more to this story. Here is Zohran having to clean this up just yesterday.
I was speaking about my aunt. I was speaking about Zerafui, my father's cousin.
So if you were able to parse that, it wasn't his aunt, as he originally said. It was his father's cousin, a distant cousin, who passed away a few years ago. She went to another school. You've probably never met her. This episode highlights a challenge for Zohran Mamdani in that he has rightly been called anti-Semitic because he has joined calls for years to globalize the Intifada. And what so many people who have called to globalize the Intifada do when called out in this situation, whether it's Zohran Mamdani, whether it is Ilhan Omar, so many others, is pivot to everyone who's criticizing me is Islamophobic. So they never have to deal with being challenged on their actual anti-Semitism. But there was another moment in his Unite the Socialists rally on Sunday night I also wanted to highlight.
Dignity, my friends, is another way of saying freedom.
Socialists throughout history have tried this messaging exercise to say you have a right to basic dignity. We all agree with that right to basic dignity, but what Zohran believes is that dignity would require things like normal taxpayers, working class families fund benefits for wealthy people, a massive redistribution. And so when he talks about dignity, the most important thing to understand there is when he talks dignity, affordability, these issues that do appeal to a lot of people and polling shows are very effective. He's not talking about a baseline of affordability to get by, and he's not talking about people who need it. He's talking about government controlling the means of production and deciding who gets what. To illustrate this point, I like this tweet from @BoringBiz. These three walk into a bar together. Who pays for the drink? You do, the taxpayer. Yesterday, an organization called the Napa Legal Institute released their 2025 Faith and Freedom Index. This index ranks each of the 50 states and the District of Columbia on religious freedom and regulatory measures. Alabama and Kansas lead the way, followed by Indiana, Texas, and Mississippi. Meanwhile, on the other end of the spectrum, Michigan, Washington, Massachusetts, Illinois, West Virginia, and Maryland received the lowest overall scores for protecting religious and regulatory freedoms in this report. Religious liberty has been a hot-button issue over the last several years, with issues like a baker in Colorado being told he was forced to bake a cake for a same-sex wedding, or those families in Maryland who tried to pull their kids out of certain classroom curriculum because of religious reasons, but were told they couldn't. President Trump has made protecting religious liberty a priority of his administration, and it's great to see groups like Napa Legal highlighting the states that are doing their own work to codify so much of that into law. One thing that I've been fascinated by as I watch President Trump focus on the issue of peace around the world, as he goes into places that have major conflicts, whether it's India, Pakistan, Russia, Ukraine, Israel, and Hamas, and he focuses on trying to end conflict. Where's the United Nations? Growing up, that was always what the United Nations was known for creating peace, for finding ways to bring people together over shared values. If you're wondering where the UN is, I have one answer. This from Bloomberg. UN to aim for guidance on wealth taxes, carbon taxes, and gender. The United Nations approved plans Friday to help developing countries tax high net worth individuals, expand carbon taxes, and build tax systems that support gender equality. So instead of working on peacekeeping, the UN is focused on pushing very political things into developing countries. Developing countries that don't even have functioning ecosystems and infrastructure, the UN is coming in to try and force them to adopt climate change agendas and DEI gender equity. President Trump has actively been pushing back on the United Nations efforts to push climate change. This from the Washington Examiner. Trump administration escalates pressure on Europe to walk back climate policies. In the absence of focusing on any kind of peacekeeping, the UN is now actively working as a tool of the climate alarmism movement to force countries, both big and small, to adopt these climate policies. And President Trump has made very compelling arguments, even in front of the UN, that energy security is national security. Even Bill Gates is now warning against this with a large change of heart, pushing back on climate alarmism. The last thing I'd highlight is this chart that's gotten a lot of attention on social media. There are no low energy rich countries, only low energy poor and high energy rich countries. So again, if the United Nations was actually focused on helping developing countries or helping push for peace, they would be focused on allowing these countries to develop reliable energy, not pushing woke climate nonsensical agendas. That is all the time we have for today. Thank you for joining us for this special episode of 10 Minute Drill. We will be back tomorrow with a regular full-length episode. Have a good one.